Hello and welcome to the Of Interest podcast. I'm Gareth Vaughan from interest.co.nz. In this episode, my guest is Jeremy Muir. Jeremy's a partner at law firm Minter Ellison Rudd Watts and an expert in all things blockchain related, such as cryptocurrencies, stablecoins, and non-fungible tokens or NFTs. He was one of two special advisors to Parliament's Finance and Expenditure Select Committee last year when it undertook an inquiry into cryptocurrencies. Hi, Jeremy, and welcome to the Of Interest podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Gareth. I'm very happy to be here.
Great. Look, it'd be fair to say that the crypto world cops a fair bit of criticism and negative media coverage, and not just here in New Zealand, but all around the world, really. And I'm sure you've heard it all, given how closely you follow the sector. I guess here's a few things I picked out that I've read of late. Firstly, it gobbles up energy in a world worried about climate change. It's riddled with scams separating people from their hard-earned fiat currency. It's a giant pyramid or a Ponzi scheme. It's a front for tax dodging or for crooks to launder money and hide ill-gotten gains, and an opportunity for rogue states to commit heists as well. There's all sorts of this. But look, with your knowledge of the local crypto scene, I was just wondering if you might be able to give us some examples of some businesses with genuine, legitimate use cases for the technology, proper business cases, and what they're doing or trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've all heard the stories, and through my role on the select committee, we had a real mix of people talking both positively and negatively about the technology. And I think the starting point is that it is technology, and like all technology, it can be used for good things, it can be used for valuable things, for innovation, for fun. Equally, it can be used for scams. Bubbles can grow in the price of assets as people speculate and try to make money along the way. But really, we're trying, in New Zealand, there is a good solid core of businesses that are trying to use the technology to do new things. And I often pause on a comment that was made by Mark Andreessen of Andreessen Horowitz, a very well-known US venture capital firm, and writing about why they as a firm were taking an interest in the crypto blockchain space. In his words, most pithily, it was, this is the other half of the internet that we didn't know how to build when we built the first part of the internet, or the first half. It's a layer of tools that allow people to interact on what's often described as a trustless basis, which doesn't mean untrustworthy. It means that the technology provides tools to allow people to interact without having to necessarily know who they're dealing with. It allows people to move money or versions of money or assets from A to B in a seamless way, a very technology-enabled way. And in New Zealand, there are some great companies that are doing good things.
Can you give any specific examples? And I mean, if they're clients, as long as you disclose that, I'm happy to talk about them to the extent that you're able to.
Absolutely. And the ones I talk about probably will be clients because we act for a reasonable chunk of the space. So there's a great group of companies that arose out of what was originally a company called Centrality, which raised capital during the initial sort of wave of fundraising through selling coins or tokens, what was known as the ICO or initial coin offering boom. And it was very successful, hit the market at the peak. We weren't acting for them at that time, but raised a pot of money and has then used it constructively to help to almost operate as a kind of a factory or an incubator to help a number of other different businesses grow. And within that, we have businesses like Fluff World, which effectively creates non-fungible tokens, NFTs, of digital bunny rabbits, which might sound entirely frivolous, but actually it's about allowing creators to have access to tools that might work in a sort of a metaverse Web3, so this is the next iteration of the internet environment, and have been tremendously successful. They were regarded as one of the stars of South by Southwest in Austin, Texas within the last year, to the point where Forbes magazine, after South by Southwest, wrote an article saying, the next iteration of the metaverse or Web3, which is kind of the internet that we live in or around, it's It's not already Player One, but it's, augmented reality, virtual reality, all sorts of things. That in that new iteration of the universe, there was a battle brewing between Meta, what was previously Facebook, so big tech, and then plucky creators who were allowing the development of owner or creator-owned content. People will be able to use the internet, own what they do, not be subject to sort of the behaviour of big tech companies. And they pulled out sort of Fluff World and the New Zealand contingent there as one of the prime players and examples of that. So that's a great company. And it's also, as part of that wider ecosystem, going through a process at the moment where there's a white paper, which we use in this context to sort of explain what people are doing for a new entity which will be called Futureverse, and that will basically bring together a number of the other technologies and players within that sort of group, including things like Altered State Machine, which is effectively artificial intelligence for NFTs, and other companies that enable payments and other things to create what will be a very large and valuable New Zealand company on the cutting edge of a really interesting space.
Okay. One of the things that I sometimes compare I guess if you call it the crypto revolution for want of a better term too, is as a young journalist, I was working in London during the .com boom, bubble, whatever you want to call that. It certainly became a bubble at the time. And a lot of the people older than me at the time were comparing that to the gold rush in the 1800s, and we've got this wonderful new internet technology. All these companies and people are trying to do things on it. Some of the ideas work, some of them don't. Some get superseded by better ideas or bigger companies with more money or whatever. And obviously some crashed and burned and some investors lost the shirts off their backs. But we got the Googles and Amazons and various other tech giants out of it, and many other things as well. Do you think that's a reasonable analogy to compare the crypto revolution to that sort of .com bubble?
Yes, absolutely. It's a question of stage. So the other thing that Mark Andreessen said in this interview was that this is the next part of the internet, and we're at a very early point of what's probably a 20, 30, 40-year journey. So we are at the .com bubble stage to a degree, or what you've seen with crypto has actually been a sort of a series of bubbles. So there were bubbles around the original coin prices. There were bubbles around NFTs with, people selling JPEGs of bored-looking monkeys for astronomical prices. All of which actually there are some things behind it. We had Pixelmon, the New Zealand case of the bright young guy in the Waikato who launched a game proposition and perhaps oversold the quality of what he was then able to deliver. But people were there willing to pay vast amounts of money sight unseen for some of these products. So we are at that stage. The hype cycle goes up and down. Crypto has been declared dead more times than you can possibly imagine. But actually the parties that are doing really constructive things kind of blaze on through, or rather steadily build. So I think that's a good example. And if you look back at the .com boom, the paradigm company was pets.com, and it flew, crashed and burned. And suddenly people were saying, whoever thought we could buy pet food over the internet? That's ridiculous. But now, of course, no one would think that was ridiculous for a moment. And one of the key investors in pets.com was a guy called Jeff Bezos, I understand, who has gone on to do other things. So.
Yeah, he's done quite well for himself, I believe. Yeah. Look, just on cryptocurrencies in particular, obviously we're talking about the likes of Bitcoin, Ethereum, probably the two best known ones. They're called cryptocurrencies, but I often wonder whether we should call them currencies, and I'm curious as to your take on this. Now, obviously, we're all familiar with notes and coins. I guess the fiat currency, although we mostly use that electronically these days. But if I go to my local dairy to buy some milk or try to buy some groceries online from a supermarket, I don't use Bitcoin to do that. I just wonder, should we call these crypto assets rather than currencies? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean,
or are they something else?
Yes,
altogether?
yes, and yes. They are many things, and some things look and operate more like currencies, or might do so. And there is a real battle brewing over the future of money. And if you look at the Reserve Bank has done a lot of work around this with their future of money consultations over the last year, which were based on both looking at the future of physical cash, so coins of notes, but also in terms of digital money. And we have a design process underway in New Zealand for what's called a CBDC, or a central bank digital currency. So that would actually be government issued, which is what we call fiat money, that would operate effectively potentially on crypto rails. So it would be able to move around in this new technological system, but would be pegged to the New Zealand dollar. And against that, we have a whole lot of other competitors. So we have the OG, if you like, which is Bitcoin in this space. And Bitcoin has a number of features which are different from a lot of the things which have followed. In particular, the fact that there is no sort of central authority that runs it or operates it. It is truly what you would say in this context, decentralized. And that actually gives it allows a real point of difference between, say, fiat government issued currency. It's not subject to manipulation by issuing more coinage into the market, sort of no quantitative easing in that sort of space. Whereas a lot of the other coins and tokens are different, and they are issued in different ways, and they have different purposes. And then we have actually, until we get, assuming we do, a variety of central bank digital currencies, we have stable coins, which are effectively coins or tokens designed to be used in a money type of way because they are pegged to a local fiat currency. And if, again, talking about New Zealand companies, there's a company called Tekimint, part of the Tekimi group as well, which has issued a New Zealand dollar stablecoin, which is another one of our clients. So that's actually a coin which you can always basically hand over and get $1 back because there's $1 held in a bank account, which is tagged to each coin. And that then allows that money to move in the crypto rails without actually the volatility that's caused for things like Bitcoin due to speculation and people trying to make money out of money.
Absolutely. There's also the ANZ Bank in Australia launched a stablecoin, linked to the Australian dollar. So the stablecoin area is a really interesting one. How significant do you see this getting in coming years? I mean, how big could it be?
Well, this is the whole battle over money is going to be huge because you also had Facebook or Meta a couple of years ago try to sort of make an entree into that world with their coin that was going to be called Libra. And I say their coin, but they were very clear from the beginning that they were putting together a sort of consortium of different parties to do it. So it wasn't simply Facebook. And the speed at which governments around the world moved to try and shut that down and effectively did shut it down.
And central banks really woke up, didn't they?
Exactly, just the amount of concern about it. And they could do that because there were a group of targets, people in the middle. It was centralized to a degree. So there were people who could come under pressure and make decisions. Whereas Bitcoin, the genie's kind of out of the bottle. It's simply circulating. So that's the power of its proposition compared to some others. So I think we're going to see lots of variants. We're going to see stable coins. We're going to see coins and tokens which circulate within a particular ecosystem. And often it's simply to make it easier within that sort of software environment for people to transact without always having to instruct Bank A to transfer money to Bank B. And if Bank B happens to be overseas, it might have to pass through banks A1, A2 and B1 and B2 and other jurisdictions to get there. Everyone's potentially clipping the ticket. So there are lots of ways in which the use of the tokenization can hopefully make that more frictionless. And it's not to say that it's the only way to do it. there are plenty of fintechs and other companies that are providing more seamless and efficient, low-friction ways of transacting or moving money or assets. But, this is one technology that is gaining traction.
Now, Parliament's Finance and Expenditure Select Committee held an inquiry last year into the current and future nature, impact and risks of cryptocurrencies. You were an advisor to the Select Committee. I've got the terms of reference here, but I won't read them all off. That inquiry obviously coincided with very high prices for the likes of Bitcoin and other crypto assets last year. They were in the news a lot. There were, of course, concerns being raised as well. What was your overall impression of the Select Committee? I mean, did you listen to all the submitters? Were you that heavily involved?
Yes, thanks. So there were two special advisors appointed, myself and Alex Sims from the University of Auckland, who's an academic with a strong interest in blockchain, Web3, and particularly things like decentralized autonomous organizations or DAOs, which is a whole other part of that world. And part of our role was to listen to all of the submissions. So we listened to all of the live submissions. We were available to the politicians on the committee for questions and things in their sessions afterwards. And then our role is now to write a report, an advisor's report, which will be delivered to the committee. It's been taking time because it's a very fast-moving space. So as soon as you write one thing, something else comes along. But we are nearly done. That will be delivered shortly. Then the next stage will be for the politicians and the Select Committee officials to write their report, which will then be tabled together with our advisor's report. And I guess to go back to your comment about general impressions, the submissions did reflect the terms of engagement, and that there were clearly people who identified issues, some definitely correctly, others perhaps a bit more sort of based on headlines or other factors which are not as scientific. And then there were plenty of people who wished to talk about the benefits or the opportunities for New Zealand in being a technology hub to help develop the positive stories or the useful uses of this technology. So as you would expect, there was focus on things like the environmental impact, and that's a space which is fascinating because there clearly are forms of cryptocurrency in particular, so Bitcoin being the principal one, which use a lot of electricity as part of their method of validating transactions, which is essential to the model because it effectively places some price on people who validate transactions to ensure that those people are in it seriously and are actually, it makes it more sort of tamper-proof by having these technologies. But the other way you can do it, there are other ways that you can manage those processes which are much lower impact or don't require. So Ethereum, which is the second major cryptocurrency effectively, and is quite different from Bitcoin in that it is the sort of the token of choice for various other uses of the technology. So creating NFTs often use the Ethereum underlying blockchain. Other uses involving smart contracts that want to sort of just compartmentalize or make more efficient transactions use Ethereum as kind of the fuel that allows them to work. And Ethereum just over the last month or so has moved from a proof of work consensus mechanism, which is what Bitcoin uses and uses a lot of electricity, to a proof of stake mechanism, which has its own issues, or you can question around it, but uses a tiny fraction, like less than 1% of the amount of electricity. So this is an industry and a technology which is in constant evolution. So those were the kind of things that people wanted to talk about at the Select Committee, and appropriately so, because it then allows the politicians to be educated and hopefully make some informed choices.
So we're going to ultimately get a report from the Select Committee itself, maybe later this year or probably next year, I guess, given we're sitting here in mid-October now. I'm just wondering, to what we might see come out of this. I mean, obviously we think of Parliament, we think of, that's the highest lawmakers in the land. So we wonder, are they going to make some laws, some rules for the crypto universe? What do you think we should be looking for to come out of this process ultimately?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm looking forward to knowing the answer to it myself. Because ultimately it is a matter for Parliament to decide whatever the advisors say in our report and whatever submitters have asked for or otherwise. It's for the parliamentarians to decide which laws they decide to pass. The thing to note is that, and this will certainly be reflected in our report, is that because this is a very fast-moving area, there is not necessarily a great advantage to being a fast mover when it comes to writing new laws, because new laws will almost certainly, or some of them, and there may be places where things can be evolved, but new laws may become out of date almost instantly, or they will be compared to new laws in other jurisdictions, perhaps favourably, perhaps unfavourably. But it is a real chess game to decide when it is actually helpful to do so. And I'll give you an example, which is not a New Zealand example. So England and Wales, the United Kingdom, has done a lot of work around positioning itself to be a hub for the global crypto markets, blockchain. You talked about terminology before. I quite like digital assets because it reflects the wider number of use cases and covers both sort of investment products and non-investment products. So England, Wales, UK have done a lot of work around developing the law. So the UK Law Commission published a couple of months ago a very lengthy 550-odd page discussion of how the law of property should apply to digital assets. And in fact, going so far as to say that there was an evolving and emerging new class of property which should be called perhaps data assets and would cover things like crypto, virtual, digital assets, but also other types of data. And they were very cautious around whether Parliament in the UK should immediately create laws to recognise this. They saw the existing English common law as being flexible enough to create rules to allow problems to be solved, disputes to be regulated. Although in some areas where there was potential confusion around perhaps what happens in a mixed fund if there's been a hack and you want to sort of allocate crypto assets, or whether someone who buys an NFT which has been fraudulently obtained by the seller should obtain a clear title to it. In some of those particular cases, they saw that there might be a way for legislation to short-circuit the process. Otherwise, you might have to wait for the right case to come along and the right judge to make the right decision. So I think we will certainly be counselling as part of our report that there isn't a single easy fix, there isn't a single crypto act which will make all of the scams and problems go away whilst also encouraging innovation in the industry.
Indeed. Just looking, I guess, more broadly at what countries overseas are doing in terms of crypto oversight or regulation, are there any really good examples of countries where you think they're getting it right or they're doing some really interesting things?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I don't think there is a clear answer of a country that is doing everything right. I think the UK is doing quite well in terms of the nuanced approach I was talking about. The United States has been more of a problem child in some respects because it's a technology centre, so a lot has happened there. But the approach which is often being called out and criticised of regulators such as the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, is that they have tried to regulate the industry by enforcement rather than by guidance. So people are clamouring to know what are the rules which allow us to do these things. But rather than sort of issuing guidance up front as to what the expectations are, often the knowledge that advisors and industry players have been given has been by the SEC deciding to take an action against a particular industry participant. And appreciate, they have a role to do, and they have to look out for scams and remedy people who have behaved badly. So it's not an easy line to tread. That's evolving in the US. Joe Biden has put out some decrees as to encouraging or requiring each of several organisations to come up with sets of rules, but that's still at a very early stage. In Australia, they're a bit ahead of us in some respects in that they had a select committee or a Senate report which came out and proposed certain things. And those things are progressing slowly. Obviously, there's also a new government there now which has perhaps other priorities because they've been out of power for a while, and there are things they rightly want to do. And this is only one small industry to evolve. So, no one has really got it right. And some players, like Singapore, which have actually thought hard about it and tried to encourage people, they created a licensing regime for certain types of crypto entities. And that's widely regarded as not having been successful because a lot of people applied, and at the end of a couple of years, almost nobody got a license. And a lot of people sort of withdrew because the process was taking so long. So you run the risk of whatever you try to implement may backfire and be regarded as unhelpful rather than helpful.
Now, you wrote a very useful article recently about New Zealand crypto asset regulation, which I've got here. And one of the things that you did, which was very useful for the likes of me, is ran through some various acts and laws and explained how various regulators in New Zealand could use these, I guess, to have some oversight of the crypto industry. I'm just wondering, are there any particular gaps to your mind that do need to be addressed? I mean, IRD's had quite a lot to say, for example, about crypto and taxation. The FMA, as I understand it, don't have any specific oversight of cryptocurrencies, but they can have some oversight of companies playing in the space, and they have powers where they can intervene if they think a particular issue requires it. But are there any particular areas where you think there is a gap?
Yeah, I mean, that's an evolving question. And I quite like the way our securities laws work, for example, compared to, say, the United States. And a lot of the issues that they have had around sort of regulation by enforcement rather than guidance has been because they regulate, the SEC regulates things which are securities. And securities has a very broad definition and therefore potentially can apply to a wide number of things. And there are a lot of things in the crypto universe which are very borderline or grey in relation to whether they're caught by that definition. In New Zealand, when we adopted the Financial Markets Conduct Act a few years ago and replaced the old Securities Act 1978, we quite intentionally moved away from a system which was closer to the American system, where we had a concept of what is a security, and it was very broad, and then you had to have a lot of exemptions that were issued to cover things and take them in and out, and it was often unclear as to what things were. And ultimately that ended up in the Supreme Court for products like Blue Chip, which for those with long memories, was a property-based investment product, which was structured in a way that seemed to sit outside those definitions and, arguably did until at least the Supreme Court. But the way we wrote the new law was to have some quite clear definitions of what is a financial product. And those are the four categories: debt, equity, managed investment products, and derivatives, which are primarily regulated. Then there is a residual category, which the FMA has a power to call in and can regulate within one of those classes. So that works quite well for crypto and as it evolves, because ultimately we can often look at tokens and coins and reach a relatively clear view. There are always borderline cases, but a relatively clear view as to how it should be treated under New Zealand law. And in some cases, there are things which are outside those cases. And there, we would generally go and talk to the Financial Markets Authority and say, do you agree that this falls outside these categories and what the consequences of that are? And you may still have some good conduct supervisory authority over it because the person's still providing a financial service because it's a means of payment or a value transfer service or something. But the FMA, if it decides to move on a sort of systematic basis, if they decided that all cryptocurrencies should be regulated as managed investment schemes, it could do a class designation or an individual designation and regulate them. But at the moment, they're content to kind of watch, and if a scam pops up, they have powers to deal with that because it's never okay to mislead people or deceive people, and we have rules that are broad enough to cover that, either the FMA or the Commerce Commission. But our regime works quite well. Where I think that we could look at changes might be around perhaps advisors and people who are out there sort of encouraging people into this space. So, the FMA probably has some abilities or the Commerce Commission if they're being actively misleading, but maybe that's a space where we could look at regulating people under our advice rules or something like that. So that's some of the things that we're considering as we look at that report and at our interactions with the FMA. And other regulators.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to wrap up, Jeremy, I was just wondering if you might be able to give us one or two examples of key opportunities and maybe key risks you see for New Zealand in the crypto or blockchain space.
Yeah, I think there is a lot to be said for using our natural advantages and the things that we do well. And for example, there was a group of venture capitalists who were in the US recently with the Prime Minister and others sort of selling the, I'll probably get this the wrong way around, do well by doing good or do good by doing well, one or other, which is sort of playing on New Zealand's image and the fact that we can have a number of companies that are good on the social impact side of investment. And there are some great companies in New Zealand that are building things that are designed to create positive environmental impacts. So there's another client, but a company called Toha, which has venture capital backing. It has some really interesting scientists and entrepreneurs involved, which will create sort of a marketplace for environmental impacts with sort of circulating tokens perhaps as part of that. So I think we can actually continue to evolve products which reflect the things that New Zealanders do well and reflect our environment, reflect our diversity in people, just using this technology in a positive way. That's what I'm hoping to see and trying to help.
Well, look, that's fantastic, really interesting discussion. Really appreciate your time, Jeremy. It's Jeremy Muir, who's a partner at law firm Minter Ellison Rudd Watts and an expert in all things blockchain related. And I'm Gareth Vaughan from interest.co.nz with another episode of our Of Interest podcast.